Start recording.
Yeah.
Use whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
Using the hopper. If I hold it up here, what'll happen, turn it around. As this wheel turns, you'll see inside, plate turns. It picks up the seeds.
Oh, right.
The seeds drop out the bottom so that we can have a more uniform stand of oats. So
That's what old seed look like.
this would, you could probably have planted these a little earlier in the year and had a more productive crop, but I was limited because of the fall rye, and we can see that stand right there. So that thin strip that's left
Oh, okay.
is the fall rye. And there's a bunch of catchphrases. People are, I don't know the terminology, but you got to wait till the flower head comes up, and then I can't remember what the word is called. There's little tassels that come out and they'll start to pollen, and that doesn't mean it's got viable seed yet, but that's sort of the limit that you want to cut that down, or roller crimp it was the other option, because it won't regrow.
Oh, okay.
And that's what I was mentioning earlier with some of the cover crops. When you plant them and then try to turn fall rye into the soil, say really early in the year, you have to work hard at trying to kill it, because it will just regrow in the springtime. And big farms would then consider it a weed. The way they get around it is they just, at least what I've heard them saying, is they spray it with a Roundup to make sure that it's dead, so they can then plant something else and not have a contaminated crop, I suppose. If you have, you're wanting to grow oats and you've got fall rye coming up, no one wants to buy your crop, I guess.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
I guess when you're on when you're doing like one big crop, it's kind of important.
Yeah, for sure.
Makes a difference, right?
But the timing of it, again, we start putting stuff in the ground around here sometimes the end of February, well, maybe mid-January in the greenhouse. Outside, we'll start prepping beds, I think, around the end of February, beginning of March. But fall rye wouldn't be ready to be killed back until now, mid-May.
Right.
So we couldn't just sit and wait. So that wouldn't be an ideal crop for us to grow in a plot over the winter that we know we're going to be growing food in the next year.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So oats would be a better choice, because the winter will kill it, and then you'll have that natural mat of organic material sitting on top of the surface to protect it.
Nice.
And then come the springtime, whenever we want to get in there, we can either decide to till it in or tarp it, or maybe just leave it and try to put through it. See how that goes. So, but before I put that down, what I got to do is put the amendment down. And it's going to be a little bit windy here. But I'll drag this over there. Now, so I've already added this exact mixture, which is a mixture of, I believe there's some alfalfa meal, canola meal, soft rock phosphate, kelp meal, there's a bit of zinc, cobalt, molybdenum. There'll be, without looking at the actual soil test, I wouldn't be able to remember it, all different sorts of things, Epsom salts, whatever the soil required because of the test is what we would have put in here by weight. It's all broken down from the soil test on a per acre basis, and then you have to convert the total weight in parts per million. So your test is going to come back in parts per million in the soil from the soil sample that was sent in.
Right.
From that test, I'll be able to determine how many pounds per acre, and the going assumption is that 6 inches of soil in 1 acre weighs 2 million pounds. So down to get it to parts per million, just cut it in half. And now you're at 1 million pounds, or 1 pound per million. So we can break it down and then have this one growing plot would be 3/4 of an acre. So once I run the math, I can get it down to what one bed is going to be, which is a 5-foot wide by 120 foot long is our growing beds.
Right.
basically only grow on 3 feet wide. The other foot on either side becomes aisle for either us to walk up and down or tractor tires and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah.
And then you're avoiding consistent compaction all over the place. You're only going to compact the soil in one area, hopefully, and then be able to eliminate it with other tools at the end of it. So, so what we do is make sure that it's all mixed up. And I just walk along and spread it.
So this is incorporated in the soil probably when it rains. Or
What I'm going to do is take our BCS walk behind tractor, which has a power harrow attachment on it, so it's not a rotavator or a rototiller, but the power harrow will stir the soil. And so once I get this down, I've already gone over it once when we added the compost, and that just made the most sense because we had the crew doing compost, and so I had added compost and amendment to this row. These other 2 rows already have compost, so I'm just going to add this one to here, and then we'll be able to, I'm going to do a few different seeds, and I've got one of the other cover crops that I'm going to seed in because I want to understand how the density comes up so I know what I'm doing on the other plot when I go to add it there in a few weeks. And as you can see, some of the stuff is really fine and blows away in the wind a little bit.
right. Yeah.
But overall, it all ends up in there for the most part. There's now currently, anyways, right now, a shortage on soft rock phosphate being available,
Oh.
which is a main component of what we add in. But we've managed to be able to add everything that we've needed for this year into the soil. So after we do our initial soil test, we'll add all everything that we can to try to balance the soil. And then every time we grow and harvest a crop and we're done with that row and we churn it in, the next time we're only going to add things like either just the canola meal as an amendment onto the soil to continue food for the next crop. Because if we continue to add all the other, I guess it would be the micronutrients and minerals, then we're going to start to throw it out of balance because we're adding more than what it demanded, or sorry, called for on the tests. So it becomes a little bit of a balancing act, but overall, it seems to work. Not too bad.
When you have the organic matter on there and it grows and pulls it out of the soil, and, like you were saying before, it won't cause an imbalance in the soil later. Are you just letting the oats grow and then you're just
Yeah, it shouldn't cause an imbalance because I haven't removed anything from the area. The only thing I probably would have done is added more carbon, so carbon sequestration, is that the right word?
right?
That's going to be happening as a part of the whole photosynthesis, and so feeding the microbes, they in turn, and the fungi that develop may make more stuff available,
Okay.
possibly that wasn't ever showing up on a soil test. Because the other thing that happens too, the soil test only accounts for, let's say we take that depth of soil and go down 6 inches,
Right.
that's what's being sent to the lab. And so they're only going to be able to tell me what is in the top 6 inches of the soil.
Right.
So if down 2 or 3 feet, or maybe for us, I think 3 to 4 feet, we're at like a glacial hardpan,
Right.
that could be made up of a different mineral. And I know that maybe not necessarily bacteria and microbes, but fungi have the ability to go down quite deep. even though we can't see it with our eyes, there's microscopic threads are going down. They may dissolve that stuff and bring that mineral back to the surface. So maybe there's little weird things like cobalt and selenium and silicate and all that stuff in that gets brought up, and it wasn't in the soil test we sent to the lab, but it could become available. The other one, they can't necessarily measure nitrogen in a lab because I think it's too volatile. It's changing all the time from an available plant food to a gas to something else, and they measure the organic matter in the soil, and then they have an idea that organic matter, for every 1% of organic matter you have in your soil, that will convert over to about 15 to 25 pounds of nitrogen per acre, I think, if I'm trying to remember correctly. And I can't even tell you what most conventional farms would be aiming for, if it's like 2, 3, 4%. Organic farms seem to have a higher organic content in their soil, so you have the ability to produce more nitrogen at least. And then the other parts of the mineral nutrient spectrum depend on what you started with and what was in the plants, I suppose. So, yeah. And then again, I know for sure this must change partway through the year, but I think it's important to just continually do the tests at the same time every year, the same as you do a water well. So you just do it at the same time every year, you'll have a more consistent reading from the lab as to what's actually in the soil versus doing it in the fall and doing it in the spring. In soil, you're going to have different microbes. You're going to have different microbe activity,
Right.
and you're going to have different microbes active in the spring than you would in the fall, because even plants and the organic matter that's in there is changing. When plants get close to fall and they switch the hormone switches in the plants to go into a reproductive cycle, like with once the flower starts to develop and that gets pollinated, it'll start to become individual seeds of fall rye. Well, when that happens, what has been going on all year is the plant has been growing and photosynthesizing and storing energy in its roots.
Right.
As soon as this starts to show up, the plant changes, I guess, its metabolic function, and it starts drawing on that root system to pull all its storage to create the reproductive cycle and to complete it, so that when this is on the plant and mature at the end of the season, you have this very high carbon but empty of any other nutrients, or not very little. I mean, I don't know the exact amount, but the plant is going to take every available piece of food it has and shove it into that.
This is just the delivery system to get it up there.
Yeah, and things will start to grow tall like trees do. A certain amount of shade can change the hormone in a plant to make it grow tall. So if you take Christmas trees, for an example, that grow out in the open, they grow short and really bushy. But if we went over into the forest and found a tree the exact same age, which we could count by the rings of branches, say, and you found one over there, a Christmas tree out in the open could be 10 years old and 6 to 8 feet high, maybe. If we went into a standing forest, that same 6 to 8 year old tree could be 30 to 40 feet high. Because it's living in an environment slightly shaded, its main goal is to get to sunlight, so it reaches.
Oh, so it grows.
Yeah, and that's even transfers over to why wood is so valuable when it's in an old growth stand. It's taken thousands of years for all of the trees in the forest to have to race for the light and have no knots.
Oh, right.
So when you clear cut it and grow in wide open Christmas trees, they all grow full of branches.
Right.
And it's terrible, low grade wood. Nobody wants it. So
Interesting.
the natural environment is better at it than we are. It's the moral of the story.
Learn from nature. So this is the menu you put on season?
Yeah, we'll do this mixture once per season. And then let's say we were doing spinach as an example. In 5 to 6 weeks after planting, this would have been harvested. This time we add some soil, it wouldn't have all of the stuff in here that we've balanced from the lab results. It would be just a basic NPK type, call it a fertilizer. So it would be alfalfa meal, canola meal. Maybe some guys are doing, we're going to try it this year, is a mixture of, we're going to do canola meal, so a 50-pound bag of canola meal, or one part of each. A 50-pound bag of alfalfa meal and a 50-pound bag of fish meal. We mix them all together. They're going to be available for, I would like to say every week, but we're probably going to realistically get to it every 2 weeks for the tomatoes. At least in the greenhouse, because we have access to the dirt close to the tomatoes, or the ones outside, we've got ground cover on it, so we won't be able to get in there. We tried doing a nutrient delivery system with compost tea through the drip tape,
Right.
but compost tea has so much stuff and organic matter in it, it actually plugged all the drip tape up, and by the time we add a filter with a small enough micron mesh, that's plugged within 30 seconds and can't have enough fluid to deliver. So we'll have to figure out a different way of doing like an overhead or a larger drip or something.
Right.
Yeah.
You want that stuff in the fluid that you're delivering.
Yeah, you need, that's the whole, the more technology we try to use, the more it doesn't seem to want to work. Which is fine.
Wow.
That's some of the, what is that saying? Some of the best lessons learned are those learned the hardest.
Yeah.
I remember the ones that are the hardest to learn.
Maybe that's what it is. Yeah.
Well, they did have a few more years back in the old days to figure things out.
Well,
And then they also weren't trying to scale things up to...
Well, we weren't relying on computers. That's the other thing. It was all having to be handed down, like recipes and that. I mean, I think about how dumb I am sometimes. The amount of times we've Googled the same recipe. I should probably just write it down myself, and then I'll remember it forever. But yeah, we get so lazy, and it's just, you just Google it. You don't have to remember it, because we're relying on someone else remembering it for us all the time. That's the neat thing about growing the food, is you're very hands-on doing it. There's lots of time to experiment and figure things out, but I think paying attention to what is going on all around and understanding that can make this part a lot easier. I know the light bulb turned on for me quite a few times coming from all the years falling and seeing everything that was going on in the bush.
Right.
But then doing this, when things happen, you're like, oh, yeah, well, of course that's how it works. It's been doing it for millions of years, right? How did I think it was going to be any different? But
Nature's got it right after all.
Just got to stop trying to...
Well, it's got it right, but we can also coax it into doing things better. That's the trick, right?
So that's that. Pretty unscientific, but it works. And so, yeah, for the most part, like I was saying, if we take what the lab results say over an acre and we break it all down, I can get a lot more consistent amount per bed, so that we don't have all of one thing deposited in one part. I mean, something I noticed that happens too is when it's really fine like that, the finer particles will settle to the bottom. So you gotta kind of agitate it around and make sure you're getting a decent enough mixture. So now I'm gonna fire up the BCS. I'll walk down and come back, and that'll basically give us a seed bed. It'll prep the seed bed, and then we'll do the oat planting and see in time what we come up with. Well, it's going to stir it. So each one of these has 2 tines, hardened steel, that go down and spin. So one spins one way, the other one spins the other way. So all 5 of them end up stirring the soil instead of rototilling it, and then you don't get that hard pan layer. So with the way a rototiller works, when the tine comes around and chops through the organic matter, it creates compression here, and then compacts the soil, and you get this. It's like taking a tamper when you're building a post and just tamping it in one spot. That motion just pounds the soil, and you get this hard layer. So the water can't get through it, and the roots can't get through it. So you end up only farming on the top 6 or 8 inches when you've got feet to work with. But it's not everybody realizes when they use a rototiller that they actually have to be concerned about breaking that. So, sorry, you calling me? Yeah, and I only was made aware of that a little while ago, which was one of the reasons why I wanted to have the subsoiler to a tractor if we were going to be utilizing a rototiller. Right. Which is what, on this area over here, so these have been subsoiled already with the tractor.
Okay. Yep.
And then rotivated. And it sort of looked like that over there, which isn't necessarily all cover crop. That's the old staff garden. So there's some mustards and some other things, and there's grasses and all kinds of stuff that is flowering. Not a lot of it has gone to seed, so it's a great time to finish mowing all that down and incorporate that into the soil. If you let it go to seed, you just compound your weed problem years later.
Right, yeah.
But then over here, what I've done is drove all the way down to where the ditch line is. As we travel that way farther, the soil gets to be a little bit wetter. And the far end where chickens are hanging out right now is the area that was so wet this spring and winter that the cover crop wouldn't really grow. But it's also like a really hard red loam, really compact, hard sand.
Yep.
So the water just gets up on top of it and travels along and doesn't go down into the earth. So I backed up and put the subsoiler down, which goes down almost, 2.5 feet. And then every 2.5 feet, I would just back up, drop it down, and rip it all the way along here. So now once I get this whole 3/4 acre plot done, then I'm going to rotivate the top. That'll incorporate the fall rye organic matter we have, and then I'll be preparing it for another cover crop. So that's why it looks like it's all ridgy. But some farms will be able to do it with a set of discs, or not discs, plow, which isn't something I know much about, or discs, to be honest. But I needed to do the subsoiling anyway, so that gets me a lot deeper than any of those other implements would go.
Right.
And then I'll figure out the next part after that.
You'll learn by doing things.
Yeah, exactly.
on a bed like this, you have obviously a good idea what kind of yield you're going to get from it.
For other crops, like the ones that were growing out there in the field, we would by looking at previous years. But in terms of, say, the oats right now,
Yeah.
what I'm hoping to do, at least with this one bed, is grow enough oats to count and figure out how many oats are in a bowl of oatmeal to see how many bowls of oatmeal a person could actually grow in a 120 foot by 3 foot bed. So my guess is it might be, we'll call it a meter, 3.3 by 3.3 or whatever, I think is probably what's required to grow enough oats to create a bowl of oatmeal.
Okay.
So that's the goal.
Good.
To give myself anyways and other people a better understanding of how that whole process works. But we'll do oats on one bed. I'm going to do that sorghum Sudan in another one with that earthway cedar.
Right.
Because when I do this bigger area, we'll be broadcasting it and then incorporating it a little differently. But it'll still give me a good idea of how the difference in growth might be. I believe one that's actually incorporated into the soil a little bit better might have better soil to seed contact and may grow better. And the other way we'll be able to tell the difference is these have been amended and the soil's been balanced with compost. This area that's going to get overseeded won't have any of that added to it.
Oh,
Because of
okay.
the scale of it. We'll
Right.
do it next year prior to planting each row once we're established. So as far as amending individual beds, the other kind of experiment that I'm going to be able to see is whether one grows really incredibly well because we've balanced it with all the little micronutrients that we've been told and the lab results say the plants require, versus just letting it fend for itself in something that hasn't been tested and has had no amendment added into it. Because the soil test is sort of more unique to the other growing area, which has had a little bit more balance added to it over the years.
Right.
So
And then when it's all over, do you just go by yield or do you actually look at the quality of the plant? Can you measure the quality of the plant?
yeah, you could, I guess you could send it to the lab to get a breakdown of the nutritional analysis. We would be looking at how well it grew. Like, did it grow even from this end of the row all the way to that end, or was there a difference? Because if we stand over here or even look at this row, again, without adding anything to that area, I know that in years past, there's been compost sitting here from dump truck loads that we would use on the rest of the farm.
Oh, okay.
So is that an indication why this area is doing so much better?
Yeah, compared to...
And then it tapers down basically to nothing.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing that happens with the fall rye, because it will grow all winter long, it still needs sunlight on its leaves to photosynthesize. And that far end would be shaded by the trees.
Right, yeah.
So that this,
The south end.
yeah, this February when the tractor finally showed up, we couldn't rototill that end because it was still frozen.
Oh, right, because it wasn't getting any sun.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So we were able to do a little bit up here just as a little trial spot. But this whole section had been untouched. And so the growth could be due to the fact that the lower winter sun maybe still reached here but didn't reach there until it gradually got higher in the sky.
Oh, right, another factor.
It's another unknown, right? So,
Wow.
yeah. But yeah, I'll get the cedar and I'll walk up and down. I'm probably going to do about 8 runs with the oats, so I might have to refill the hopper a few times depending on how fast they go. And they have measurements, which I know I won't be very close to, but they'll have measurements like so many pounds per acre, and oats might be 2 bags per acre, so only 100 pounds of seed should do an acre, meaning the plants can actually be spaced out half decently so they're not fighting each other for nutrient and water and stuff like that. So again, I don't know if this hopper is going to be the exact proper size for doing what I want, or for their exact spacing, but we'll see what happens. I know.
Oh yeah.
So that looks like it's way too much seed. You can see it dropping down here.
Okay, yeah.
So that's a lot of seed. So I'm going to change the hopper.
Oh, it's just a little between the sections on that wheel. There's a little more space between it.
Yeah, I think there might be the same. I think the hole on these is a little smaller.
Oh, okay.
So it'll allow less seed to actually drop through there. But I can finish a little test plot here. Hard to tell light, isn't it? We'll fill it up. No looking back now. Well, no. There's no. That's a good question, though. I don't really know what the ideal spacing would be, and so to do, like I don't have enough knowledge yet, but I do understand now they've got grain drills which have much more closer spacing, like say 6 inches, I think.
Right.
And then they have planters, and seed planters would be stuff for like corn, soybeans, things, and that's obviously big agriculture stuff. They'll do it anywhere from 30 inches apart on one row of planting, at 6 inches to a foot apart for one seed.
Okay.
And then 30 inches before the next one, up to 60 inches. I've heard of guys planting 5 feet apart, which that just seems crazy to have 5 feet from one, say, row of corn to the other. Now maybe I'm mistaken, but I keep hearing people talking about the terminology. But yeah, I would think 30 inches is lots. But for oats or fall rye or whatever the other grains are, having a cover crop that's going to get churned in a lot sooner, you definitely want to increase your seed density. And the other hope is that the cover crop that grows will create more shade and hopefully suppress some of the weeds that may germinate later. If you leave it too sparse, they all get enough nutrient and water to get well established, and then you have a hard time dealing with them. And they'll go to seed sooner than your cover crop would be ready, so they sort of get the upper hand.
So the science is to grow your cover crop so it suppresses the weed and gives you enough yield out of it to
Yeah,
balance.
yeah, and so I mean, for me, I'm trying to hopefully find a happy medium compromise here where we can still have the oats develop and grow healthy enough to have a kind of good idea with the little oatmeal test, but not so dense like the first seed plate we tried there. It was dropping way too many seeds, and it was dropping anywhere from like 6 to 8 seeds every few inches.
Right.
That's just too much seed for any of them to be able to grow well. They'll all be competing, and you'll just have a poor stand, which if all the plants grow poorly because they've been overplanted, you're going to end up with insect problems or something because the plants are stressed.
Oh, okay.
So that becomes, and that's sort of the natural process too. If something was overpopulated like that, disease or insects will get it and thin out the herd a little bit. But with these, yeah, the ideal spacing, I don't know. And then again, when we switch and try the other cover crop, because they're such a fast growing crop, I think they would probably even want more space
Right.
in terms of the way they would be planted on a massive scale, but I'm going to probably do it the same. I mean, if we get about 6 inches between runs on this 3-foot wide bed, I think that should be sufficient to see what we end up with.
Right.
Somebody that knows more about it will probably educate one day.
Maybe you've got a new way of doing it.
Well, don't be afraid to try something and fail, right?
That's the whole thing, yeah.